All right, Joel Gausten here from joelgausten.com. For this conversation, I'm delighted to be joined by someone who's very quickly becoming one of my favorite authors. And my guest has a tremendous book coming out in a few weeks' time, so we wanted to hit the ground running and share with the viewers a bit about that. It's my great pleasure to welcome Melissa Meszaros. Melissa, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Hi, thanks for having me, Joel.
Oh, absolutely. Well, first of all, as I said before we started recording, I just finished reading your upcoming book. It's a book called Song Over the Bones, comes out October 2nd on Oil and Water Press. First of all, my congratulations to you. This is a memoir, and not only is it a memoir, but it's your second one. Having written one myself, I know it's an uphill climb in many ways. So first of all, just my congratulations to you on hitting the finish line twice with a book of this nature.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And to give the viewer who may be unfamiliar with you and your work a bit of a summary going into the conversation, you work as a publicist professionally. You've done that for several years, and for the past few years, especially, you've been working primarily in the comic book industry as a publicist, but you have a history in the music industry as well as being an avid music fan. As I said, this is your second memoir. Your first came out a few years ago. It's called Heavy Metal Headbang, which is about your experiences sustaining a traumatic brain injury, a TBI, on your way to a Judas Priest concert. So you talk quite a bit about that experience, and then this book coming out in October, Song Over the Bones, certainly talks about that experience still, but in the midst of the issues you're working through uh, in resulting from your injury, your house burns down and you lose everything. And at that time, you're in a relationship that isn't going terribly well, to put it mildly. So the combination of those events leads you on the road, and you take journeys to various points of interest as a music fan, and you explore dealing with not only the loss of your possessions, but the loss of this relationship and working through those matters in the music fan way, we'll say, And I'm a few years older than you are, but we're both children of the 90s. So for members of our generation, there's a tremendous amount of really cool 90s pop culture references mixed in there. I think anyone within our general age group will read the book and nod more than once at some of the things you've discussed within it. So I thought it was a wonderful read, a great book, heavy at times, of course, but uh, from an author to author perspective, I really just have to commend you first and foremost. You've laid a lot of things out in this book, which can be a challenge, and I appreciate the fact you've done it. Um, it's a very raw story in a lot of ways. So, to kind of bring things back even prior to the previous memoir, when and how did memoir writing enter your orbit as far as something that you wanted to pursue as a writer?
Um, well, I'd always been journaling. For as long as I can remember, I've been journaling. And when I was probably 13 years old, I started going to a lot of shows. And because I loved the way that it made me feel so much, I would wake up the next day and I'd be in class and I'd be writing about the show as if it was in real time so I could relive it again. And I became obsessed with this. And I thought I was going to go into rock journalism for a long time just because of the passion I had. And I saw the way that they used to write in magazines like Rolling Stone and Spin and Hit Parader, less Hit Parader, but very experiential reading, and they'd be talking about what albums sounded like and shows felt like and the lights and the sweat and the smell. And I just loved living inside of that. That is the one thing I wanted to encapsulate. And then as my life moved forward and I worked in music, it destroyed music for me for a little bit. I'm not going to lie. Being around that is very tough, as I'm sure you know, speaking to many musicians yourself. And yeah, I just really I became really gravitated towards this idea of crystallizing moments and evoking emotion. And I don't know, I just followed me through graduate school. And that's, yeah, I got my degree in creative nonfiction from Antioch University. And it kind of went from there.
Mm.
Yeah.
So your first memoir obviously is about the injury you sustained. So you started writing books after that incident took place. And I have a bit of experience. I used to work in social services for a time, and a fair amount of my client base were younger people who had TBI. And obviously, every TBI is different. That's the big lesson I learned from that experience. But I'm very curious because you had, obviously you've been a professional for many years, long before that incident took place. Um, and you've published two books since. So, how would you say your experience in approaching writing, which takes a certain amount of brain capacity, was affected? Do you have in your mind a definitive pre and post perspective as far as your approach to writing material?
Yeah. Heavy Metal Headbang was never intended to be a book. I was told because I had multiple therapies that it would be best if I start journaling because I didn't really have much memory as far as like long term or short term at that point. And they said, well, you know, if you start writing things down, you'll start remembering things. And there was a long period where I couldn't listen to music because it was cacophonous. I'd
Hmm.
hear all the instruments separately, and it just became a mess in my head. But by the time I started healing, I would say it was probably like 2 or 3 months after I sustained the injury. I started listening to music again, and that started bringing up all these memories. But it wasn't in a positive way. There was dissociation. And I would take these memories and I would write them down and put them together. And then there was the other side of, having to deal with the legal consequences of getting hit by a car and all the things that go into that. And, being really anxious and paranoid and making me feel like, I was a victim, but I was at fault somehow. And I decided that I was taking all these vignettes of these memories that I had as they came up as I was hearing music. And I compounded it into two mini stories that kind of flowed together about memory and also what I was going through at that time. Um, and it was very, very difficult. So when I looked at everything that I had, I was like, well, you know what? I don't really know that much about TBI. I didn't know anybody with a TBI at the time. And I said, if I had something like this, it would have been so helpful. And that's why I decided to put it out. And actually, with the publisher Head Press, they started the Oil on Water Press imprint to publish Heavy Metal Headbang.
Hmm.
And and since then, I've met so many people who have said, thank you for writing this book, all ages, all walks of life. And it has just been such a great experience, like making lemonade out of lemons.
Yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. I can tell you some of the people I'd worked with in the past who had TBI. Um, in some cases, again, prefacing my comment by saying, everything's different. There's no such thing as two exact TBI. But those people who had more of a creative bent to them prior really had it afterwards. It seems that, creativity, um, I don't want to say it was fueled by it, but in certain ways their minds were reconditioned in a sense where maybe they were more apt to explore creative endeavors. So I certainly saw that with some of the people I was working with. And it's fun, just from a past professional perspective, having worked in that field, I think it's wonderful that there's a book like yours that sort of addresses it very head on. And you're somebody who's from punk rock, you're somebody who's from the music community. And many of the people I've worked with were as well. So from that perspective, I think it's fantastic that you've put those things down. Um, in terms of this next book coming out, let me just say something that I know being an author myself, authors hope to hear. I get it. I get this book. And although you're writing about, very specific things, the loss of your home, your injury, things that not everyone experiences, I think there are some really great universal topics discussed that I think will draw people in. I think especially people of my generation. One thing I love about it is it does speak to this generation that we're in. I think some ways today people talk a lot about the generation after ours, and as they should, because that's the youth generation now. And then it goes from that to the world of politics, which, sadly is mostly still run by old white men. So this segment that we exist in sort of gets overlooked at times. I think this book speaks a bit closer to that side of things. And there's a great quote in there. And when I have an author on the show, I'm always nervous because I don't want to give away too much of the story, but obviously we want to talk about it, right? But you have a great quote in here, which reads, in your late 30s, there's no room for weakness and fumbling in adulthood. Mastery is expected. Anything less feels like failure. Um, I'm in my late 40s now. I still feel that way. So I don't know if that feeling ever changes, but and that's very true. And you're very open and honest about things. I'm taking a long walk to a question because you have for many years worked in publicity, which is in some ways it can be the antithesis of being bare and being honest because as a publicist, you want your clients to look their best. And I mostly am the recipient of publicity these days, but I've dabbled in professional publicity as well. And one of the goals is avoiding your clients appearing like they're the kid in the classroom in their underwear, right?
Mhm.
But your book, you're kind of in your underwear in front of class for the duration of the book. So, as a publicist, did you have sort of a push and pull mentally where um, you had that temptation to hold back at times, per the tools of your trade? Did that enter the picture for you?
With the first book, it did indefinitely. I try to be as candid as possible because they see it as two separate entities. There's my writing self and there's my publicist self. And there are things that I do leave out. And I think, spoiler alert, like one of the biggest things that I had to address, because my life is still very public in a lot of ways. And people knew that I was going through this in my industry, with the GoFundMe that they helped raise. And they knew that my partner had left because one of my clients was an attorney and he said, "How can I help you?"
Mm.
But, you know, when a lot of my clients and a lot of the people that I work in the industry with read heavy metal, there was no pushback with anything. It was all accolade. And that's what gave me like the strength to write this next book and really be honest about I had an alcohol problem. I had an extreme alcohol problem. Who wouldn't? And I think, that's dipping into territory that it could potentially affect my job. But you know what? That was the past and it hasn't ruined my job yet. So obviously, I make it very clear that I was only working and drinking, working and drinking. And the fact that I still have a job, that was several years ago. I mean, I think if anything, people are going to come out and if they, see that side of me in a negative light, I'm still human.
Yeah.
That's what it comes down to.
Yeah. Yeah. Personally speaking, I prefer to work with people who don't forget that. And sometimes being the one to put things down on paper and express those things helps you connect with people more, you know. Um, but I think that's a positive outlet as well, it's when you admit the human frailties that you reach those universal things, like I said, my house. thank God, has never burned down. But I've certainly been on road trips dealing with my things, you know. I've certainly had the same soundtrack as yours, working through my things. And yeah, I love too how you've structured the book and every chapter being a song title. And an eclectic song list as well, goes from Ozzy to Jim Croce. And, so I was picking up those things along the way. I'm like, oh, okay, I get this. I understand exactly where this is going. Um, and I don't want to say characters because these are real people, but there are people in the new book who aren't always represented in the most positive light. And certainly there's always that risk of being just by nature the one writing the book, being that unreliable narrator, right? I think we all face that problem too, because we're seeing it through our lens. And we're always sort of the heroes of our own story in a sense. Um, that said, did you reach out to the people in the book to make them aware of what was happening before reaching the finish line?
Yes. So, and I did this in heavy metal as well. I try to use their actions as a way for the reader to gauge who they are as a person. I never openly convey who I think they are, but that changed a little bit in this book because I was dealing with my friends. And I I know that there are some things that I said about my friends, but they're also very honest. And even like my friends reading through the excerpts that I wrote about them, they said, "Oh my gosh, that's so me." So it was very flattering. But as far as my ex is concerned, absolutely not.
Hmm,
Absolutely not. But there was a trick to that where I had all that information. None of that is incorrect. I'll never say why or how, but defamation libel. But I I feel like if he wasn't willing to step up to end the relationship in a proper way,
hmm,
he doesn't deserve it. He doesn't deserve it. And if he comes out looking like how he looks, that's really how he was. And that's his cross to bear, not mine. And I
hmm.
don't think that it was too I never said anything personally damning about him. I only illustrated what he said and what he did.
Right.
Um, and I was thinking about it in terms of being fair to other people that have been through this and it being so covert at first, and then it surfaces more and more and more and more. And I was oblivious to a lot of it. It was extremely painful. And then you go back and revisit it and how did I see this? So I think that was my intention with writing him the way that I did. Yeah.
Hmm. Um, Going back to the music side of it, which obviously is the lifeblood of the book in a lot of ways. Um, and when you just said that, your experience as a music listener was dramatically affected negatively, in the early days after sustaining the industry, that broke my heart because I know how important music was for you. Um, having gone from the experience of having the accident to now, has your experience as a music lover changed? Do you feel music serves a different purpose in some ways now, um, that it hadn't served fully prior to the incident taking place?
I think that I've come to appreciate it as I know it more. It has been stilted. My interest in music has stilted a great deal only um, because with my traumatic brain injury, I now have ADHD.
Mhm.
And I'm in this consciousness where if the music comes after a certain period, I'm like, I don't understand this at all. And I think also I'm more integrated in the industry itself as before, instead of what I was before. And I see it in a different way. Like it has changed the relationship I have with bands that I love. It has made it a lot more personal, and that would be the only other way that it's changed. Yeah.
Mm. Of the bands you write about in the book, one that really stands out for you in ways we'll get to in a moment, but the GITS obviously is one band. And you have certainly an affinity for bands from that part of the country, but they certainly stand out in the book. Um, and I'm a huge fan of the GITS as well, as you know. And you refer to them as a lifeline in the book. And it's like, yes, 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 for so many reasons. That band certainly fills that role. Um, what stood out most for you when you first encountered them? What made them that band that has remained sort of that go-to for you?
Well, I was actually a bigger 7 Year Bitch fan at first. And I was 12 or 13 when I first heard the Gits. And to me it was so loud. I couldn't even listen to L7 or Melvins at that point because it seemed so heavy to me, and that's how I felt about the Gits. But as time went on, I actually worked with one of 7 Year Bitch's husbands on a comic book project. And because he asked me, he's like, oh, So by the time that point had happened, he was like, oh, my wife was in 7 Year Bitch. I'm like, yeah, I like the Gits better because I would be flip-flopped on it. But it was after the fire, and I'd heard Enter the Conquering Chicken, Kings and Queens, all of it. But after my house burned down and I was displaced, and we were in this rental home, this beautiful rental home in Eugene, Oregon. Um, like Seaweed came on, and I was like, this is the only thing that underlines exactly what I'm feeling right now. And every piece of emotion that I could have put in, I had no words. I was just completely eviscerated. And I don't think that I ever showed that. I felt like I had to be strong for everybody else in the situation. I couldn't mourn. I didn't lose. I mean, I lost all my belongings, but I was more concerned about the community around me, losing family members and losing their homes that had been there for generations. I felt like I didn't have a place in that grief. So I just listening to me as vocals. And, I think that each one of them as a musician is a master of their craft. Steve being a fantastic drummer, Andy being a fantastic guitarist, and it all comes together and it just feels so perfect.
Hmm.
Yeah. It's emotional, it's raw, it's heavy, but it also is very classic, you know? When you attest to that, like there is no, it doesn't fit into a genre. It's just timeless.
Hmm. Yeah, and musically speaking, you're absolutely right. There are things that I hear now on those records that I hadn't heard previously. I played French and the Bully to a friend of mine who's a real guitar guy. Like he's pals with Robert Fripp, and I mean he's different level guitar. And he's like, "Wow, what's that guy doing?" And he's like analyzing that record and being blown away. He's like, I haven't heard that in punk before," and he was really into it. So I think there's that as well. The music was just so good you know. And you listen to it now, especially now that there's been, kind of a new light with some of that material, and another opportunity for people to kind of revisit it. I never really put it away, but now that it's back around again, so I've been listening to it more and more, and yeah, there's real power in that stuff. And obviously and unfortunately, there was always going to be a little bit of an asterisk when it comes to discussing the Gets. But I think the music is really what stands out most. That's the lifeline that people get from it. I should mention, since we're talking about the Gits, one of the reasons why you and I connected is back in late December, I had Steve Moriarty from the Gits on the podcast, who recently became your husband. So congratulations to you and Steve on that.
Thank you.
And I love his book as well, and really enjoyed having him on the podcast, and really appreciate, his openness talking about the book, as I know, in light of the subject matter, particularly, which isn't even really in the book, but the inevitable things come up. And I know it had to have been potentially a lot for him. So, I appreciate him taking that on. And that's a beautiful book as well. And I will link in the video description my interview with Steve about the book on the GITS, published by Farrell House last year. I'll put some information up on that as well. But Steve is working with you currently in putting together the audiobook version of the new book coming out, right?
Yeah. His audiobook just was released last week.
Oh, cool.
Um, he, yeah, he wanted me to do it because when I read heavy metal, he listened to heavy metal and he said, "You have to do another one. You have to do another one." I'm like, "I don't want to." And when I did the last one, I went to the old Reciprocal studio to record. And it was it was such an experience. And it changed the way that I heard the book and I like read it and I saw it and I really just felt like I could let go of everything at that point. So he's been really pushing me to get it done. And we'll eventually get to it. I know like he's got all the equipment set up and it's just a matter of me. But we're still promoting his book and
Mhm.
now we're going to be going on book tour at the end of the year together. And yeah, he's still playing music and doing all that stuff. So he's pretty busy. He's a busy guy.
Fantastic. So your book tour currently is being worked out for the Pacific Northwest. Um,
We have a full one in Pacific Northwest, and we're going to be in New York in October. We have a date in Brooklyn, and then we have a date at Atomic Books in Baltimore.
oh, nice.
Yeah,
Very
yeah.
cool. Yeah,
John Waters.
I'll have to keep the Brooklyn thing in mind. Please let me know when that comes.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll make the trip down. I'm in New Hampshire at the moment, but I'll make that trip down for that for sure. For sure.
Great. It'd be great to meet you in person.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's I definitely want to get I have the PDF you were kind enough to send me of the new book, but I definitely want to get a physical copy as well. So looking forward to that. I did a bit of digging into your professional past as well and checked out your PR company, which I'll link as well in this video. And dove into your bio a bit. So I gotta ask you a very important question because you spoke the same language that I live by. Favorite P-Funk album?
America Eats Its Young.
Hmm.
Is that bad?
No, 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 no. Hey, there's no bad
I
answers.
mean, Cosmic Slop is also, you know, I don't know. What's yours?
That's a tough one. Maggot Brain comes to mind.
Really?
Just cause. I mean, you can't beat the title track, you know. I mean, that's just like from another planet, as most of their work was. But that one, yeah, that's the one I grabbed for 3 a.m. And that's how I judge my favorite album from a band. If it's the 3 a.m. record, that's gonna win out for me.
I love it. That's your 3 a.m. record. Mine is Apple, Mother Love Bone. Every
Mm,
time. I don't know why. It's just my go-to.
yeah, I have several 3 a.m. records, but Maggot Brain's up there. It's all depending on the mood. Sometimes it's all Nick Cave all the time, as it has to be. But you know, yeah. Ma- I mean, we can do an entire podcast just on P-Funk, but uh thought to hit you with that question because I know whenever I find out someone knows, like, all right, well, let's get into it. So yeah, America eats its young. Good answer. I'll accept that.
Yes.
Fantastic. So the kind of wrap things up, and I very intentionally didn't dive too deep into the details of the book because my goal is to really encourage the viewer to read it themselves, and invest the time, um, because it's a great read and a great story, and it just, again, particularly if you're of the '90s generation, it will absolutely speak to you. And certainly if you've dealt with major losses, it's certainly a book to explore as well. And I love the way it concludes. again, I don't want to give away too much, but it's a positive story. I'll leave it at that for the book. But because you've experienced a lot, and there were so many times reading the book, I thought, good God, what's going to happen now? Um, uh, for you, because any one of the things on your checklist, it would be reasonable, unwanted, of course, but reasonable to go, okay, this would drive anyone over the edge to do, bad things, if not the worst thing one could do. What helped you through that, really? What were the keys to not being in a place where you let any one of those things be the period at the end of that sentence to where you're two books into dealing with these issues as they've unfolded? Um, what kept you moving?
That's a great question. Um, it's a combination of things. One being the support of my friends, unconditional support and unconditional love. And I think they're really the stars of the show in the book, as far as I'm concerned. And from somebody who doesn't really accept help, that was the one lesson I did learn from them, was that they were there for me and they were offering help. But moving from site to site when I was technically homeless, um, going to Graceland and going to Kurt Cobain's house in Beretta Park and going down to Louisville to see Mia's grave, Mia Zapata. And all of that, it put things in perspective because I was listening to music, I was feeling it, and it gave me a sense of grounding that gave me the wherewithal to go where I deemed was home again. And because I didn't see all these people pulling me backwards in a positive way.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, again, the book is called Song Over the Bones, comes out October 2nd. Again, my video description for this interview will be loaded with links. I encourage people to check it out. And if you're in the Pacific Northwest and or Brooklyn, Baltimore, coming up later this fall, I would certainly check out the events that you have planned with Steve. Um, and I'll certainly be on all your websites and things that I'll post in the video description so people can follow when those events are officially announced. And most importantly, if you're watching this video, please get this book. There's a lot of value to be drawn from it. And it's just a great read. Again, if you're from the rock and roll community, the punk community, our generation, this book will definitely speak to you. The reference point I would offer some folks, because it reminded me quite a bit of High Fidelity in some cases, in some ways. Completely different subject matter, of course, but some of the underlying things, what spoke to me back then, a quarter century ago, speaks to me in this book. So I'm very excited to know it's coming out. I really appreciate the advanced read and the opportunity to talk to you a bit about it. Wish you the very best of luck with it. And just on a personal level, thank you for doing this book. As I said, I've had some experience with people with TBI, and it's great that someone speaks to that because I don't think that's spoken about enough. And I will wholeheartedly recommend this book to people I know who have a similar injury. I know they'll find a lot of value in it. So I'm very grateful something like this exists in the world. So my thanks to you for that as well. And we'll definitely be seeing each other in Brooklyn in October. I'll make every effort to be there.
Great. Yeah. Thank you for your kind words.
Oh,
I
it's my pleasure. And thank you for writing the book and all my very best to you and Steve.
Thank you.